everyone, and thank you for joining the Sexual and Domestic Violence Town Hall. I'm Adia Johnson, and I'm the founder of the Yellow Heart Committee and survivor of sexual assault.
Hi, and I'm Nigel Brown, and I'm one of the vice presidents of the Yellow Heart Committee.
The Yellow Heart Committee is an organization that is mobilizing to help survivors of trauma through policymaking and community outreach, which is why it is incredibly important that we hold this town hall during Domestic Violence Awareness Month to show our support for survivors. However, our primary focus is to raise funds so that way we can open a center that will support those types of survivors and also show our deep commitment to the intersectional nature of trauma. So we'd like to take a moment to thank our co-hosts. We are so incredibly grateful to have them along on this journey. So let's take a moment to thank Love Never Fails, Family Justice Center, I Am a Survivor, Inc., Girls Like Us, The Facts, and Unapologetically Surviving. They all provide amazing resources and help, and I really encourage that everyone checks them out after this town hall. So thank you all again for being a part of this. But before we get started, I want to share my own story of how Yellow Heart started. So please take a moment to watch.
1 year ago today, I lost the ability to walk. What happened to me is called conversion disorder. Conversion disorder is when you convert psychological stress into a physical reaction. So the stress from being sexually assaulted literally almost paralyzed me. But a year has passed and I've grown. I went through a lot of grieving of the loss of the person I used to be. I battled anxiety, PTSD, suicidal ideation, and panic attacks. Lost male friends who chose to further rape culture and choose an abuser over a survivor. But now I've walked around the world. I'm finding ways to heal through traveling, education, organizing, and therapy. I've also grown to love those who have the purest hearts. Look who came to visit! And rebuild the strength I lost. Finally, we did not understand playing specials ever. I'm healing both mentally and physically. Recognize the significance of family, friends, and community. But most importantly, I prevail and realize that silence isn't surrender. I hope everybody was moved by India's story. It certainly moved me, and her and who she is as a person is one of the reasons why I got involved in this organization. And so we actually are extending that invitation out to anyone who would like to become one of our interns. This is a great opportunity, especially for those who are still in school and who are looking for something to do. You can join one of our teams, which is community outreach, policy and research, fundraising, social media, and marketing. This is definitely a great opportunity and allows you to really get involved and get hands-on because we are growing and we do need a bigger team. So please feel free to visit our link right there, or you can visit our website for more information. Also, we are in the process of getting our 501c3 status approved, but we are looking for donations to help support our mission. As we mentioned earlier, we are raising funds to eventually open up a center to support victims of trauma. So if you find it that you can, please feel free to donate via our Cash App or our GoFundMe.
So I would like to introduce our moderators. So first we have NBC Bay Area investigative reporter and survivor Candace Nguyen, Sassoon City Vice Mayor Wanda Williams, and California State Assembly member Rebecca Bayer-Khan. Each of our panels will be taking on one section of our panel, which includes the urgency of the issue, reimagining support for survivors, and addressing the necessary policy changes. Next, we have our panelists. So we have California State Assembly member Tim Grayson, South Carolina State House candidate Dr. Jermaine Johnson, Oakland City Council President Rebecca Kaplan, and Antioch City Council member Monica Wilson. Continuing onwards, we have a bunch of community leaders a part of this discussion as well, with San Francisco Pride President Carolyn Weisinger, President of Alliance for Hope Casey Gwynn, and CEO of Love Never Fails Vanessa Russell.
And throughout our panels, we will be breaking it up with messages from our speakers. We have U.S. Congressman Mike Thompson, U.S. Congressman Eric Swalwell, California State Assembly Member Rob Bonta, and California State Assembly Member Shirley Weber. In addition to our speakers, we'll also hear from survivors.
We just wanted to go over some housekeeping before we get started. If you want to participate, please feel free to use the chat box to say hello and also ask questions for our panelists. And wanted to address that we will say that there is a trigger warning. Some of this content is really hard to hear and handle. So do whatever you need to do to provide a space for yourself. If you need to step back and take a moment away from it, we completely understand. Put yourself first and then come back when you're ready. But with that, kicking off our town hall is an amazingly brave survivor who was willing to share her story of domestic violence. Please meet Aaliyah.
Hi, my name is Aaliyah Dangerfield, and I am a survivor of domestic violence. Domestic violence is an ongoing issue throughout the world right now. Always, but especially right now due to the stay-at-home orders because of COVID. COVID-19 has definitely brought people closer to home and made people stay at home. And sadly, home isn't always a safe place for everybody. There's a lot of women and men that aren't able to speak up right now or get help or talk to anybody. They're stuck at home with their abusers, and it's sickening. I became a survivor when the father of my child tried to kill me in March of 2020 this year. We had a court date stating that he would only be able to get visitation of her every, I believe, for one day out of the month due to some other drama that had occurred due to his violence and lack of control. 3 days after our court hearing, he shot me 5 times, pistol whipped me, and strangled me. I broke my knee. I had multiple blunt force trauma, blows to my head, gunshot wounds in the back of my head and in my spinal cord. I'm happy that I'm still here today to be able to reach out and make this video and just share some of my story with anybody who is out there like me that doesn't think that they have a voice and doesn't think that they can be heard, because there are beautiful committees and programs like this one to help you out and give you that pedestal to speak. So I would love to bring awareness to domestic violence, to sexual assault, sexual abuse, Let's just try and help as many people as we can. Thank you so much.
And so wanted to give another trigger warning. Aaliyah's story is incredibly powerful, and we have another one that's next. It's a lot to take on again. So reminding everyone, do what you need to do. If you're not able to sit there, if you need to just take time away, it's completely understandable. So next story.
My name is Brittany Richards, and I am a survivor of both domestic violence and sexual assault by my longtime partner. We were together right under 2 years. It started out as just small negative comments and turned into psychological abuse, which then evolved, at that point, and manipulation, which then evolved over the course of 3 or so months into physical violence. It started as choking and then turned into hits, open hand, closed hand. I was coerced into a sexual act by my partner, which ultimately led to the worst of the physical assaults and my sexual assault by him. Coercion coming in the forms of, if we can do this 3-way, I will stay with you, or, I just don't know about the relationship, but if you will just perform this, I will stay beside you, or I'm just not sure how I feel about you anymore. I don't know if I love you, but I feel like if we could do this, it would strengthen our relationship and I would still love you. So I did it. In the middle of it, I tried to call it off. And because I was being physically hurt by both my partner and the female that he had chosen, and I tried to call it off, and he severely beat my face into a wall and tried to run. Needless to say, I got up, and he was arrested in Chicago, Illinois in November. After that, I went through a few more escalated fights where he tried to drive off with me in a car, hit me in the face, threw things at me at full speed. Prior to that, I went through the other forms of abuse where it was just, I would be crying and I would get a blanket thrown over my face and mocked and told to shut up. I would have timers set on me and told that I couldn't speak or could only speak for X amount of time. I was hung up on, I was belittled, I was called names. My previous assault was used against me as a form of emotional battery. I was choked. I was lied to. I was cheated on repeatedly. I was manipulated into believing that when I would suspect something that I was crazy. I was put in therapy because I was told that I was wrong and that there was something wrong with me for suspecting that he was cheating. He triangulated other women around me. He made sexual advances towards other women around me so that it would result in my own paranoia. Really, the list just kind of goes on and on. I can say that as recent as the end of July, I went public with my abuser via Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. He was fired from his job at Google as of August 1st and is now, I don't know where he is. I have put in no contact. He's continued to maintain that he was trapped in the relationship because he couldn't leave. And that's why he chose to beat me up. But the begging him back thing was purely because he'd manipulated me into thinking that he was the only thing that I was worth getting. And so I don't know where he is now. Who knows? But yeah, so if you want to know more about my story, I have it. I'm happy to talk to someone about it or go into any more detail or provide less detail, but I did want to provide my story. Living after this has been the hardest thing in the world. You go through moments where you wish that you didn't live, to moments where you're grateful that you did and that you spoke out and that women are safe, or hopefully they're safe if they Google him. I will be in therapy for the rest of my life. I don't trust people. I don't even trust my own friends that are men, and can't see myself ever being intimate with another person, maybe ever. I have broken teeth. I have like a completely shattered self-esteem. Who knows what else? So, yeah. For Domestic Violence Awareness Month, I wanted to share my story, and again, I'm happy to go into any more detail if needed. All right, thank you.
Candace, you're good to go.
Hey everyone, and first I would like to thank those speakers, whether they're here or not. I think those are just so raw, and I was shocked about how recent they happened, and I know we're all probably in the same space, just kind of absorbing those stories. So we're going to talk about our first panel about the urgency of this issue and really why we're all here today. So we heard those stories. We've heard that domestic violence is up, especially during this quarantine with people at home more being unable to get away from their abusers. And also, if not that, some of the incidents of abuse are becoming more severe. Even in the field of journalism, I've heard talking to law enforcement that even if the number's not up, when they do happen, they're more severe in terms of violence. Behind every statistic is a story. And my question for you is kind of hearing your story. And this is an open question to any of the speakers here today. What motivated you to use your specific platform to address this issue of domestic violence and join this discussion today?
Candace, this is Tim Grayson. I wanted to respond in first of all, I just have to thank the survivors who have shared their stories and who are going to share their stories. And I admire your strength, and I want to let you know that your voices are very, very powerful. In working with victims of interpersonal violence, I witnessed firsthand the lack of streamlined services that were available to survivors. And so that's when I realized there is a platform that I have, that I've been afforded, that I can make a difference and step up and remove those obstacles and get around those pitfalls or the things that block access to services. So in the district that I represent, and I think it's imperative all over in every community, and that is what was called a one-stop shop, something like a family justice center can provide, where all the services are in one place and the victim can go to that particular location and receive their services. So that's what motivated me to be here today, to hear and see what others are doing. So Candace, thank you to you, and thank you to Yellow Heart Committee and Family Justice Center for all that you do. And I'm here to listen and learn.
Hi, this is Vanessa Russell from Love Never Fails, and I am actually a survivor of childhood sexual abuse as well as domestic violence, and that was really my motivation for founding Love Never Fails, which is an organization that addresses the issue of human trafficking, starting out in the Bay Area, but really branching out across the nation. And, as Mr. Grayson shared, this is, front and center for us. And Aaliyah shared, that so many people are trapped at home due to the pandemic. And so many children are being ensnared through social media and through digital recruiting strategies, and to be trafficked and to be abused and to be preyed upon. And the story that was just told is unfortunately an all too common scenario where someone is very methodical about how they are recruiting, preying on the vulnerabilities of another person. And I think more education and awareness needs to be provided, which is why I'm so grateful to the Yellow Heart Committee for this day, because we need to understand what the tactics are and the strategies are. And then also, as was mentioned, we need to have a safe place, such as the Family Justice Center that is part of this initiative. We need to have a safe place for people to go. And so that is what, motivated me to use my platform, is to advocate, use my platform as a survivor to advocate for survivors to have that safe place and to have that voice, so that they can become safe. And also, I think there's something very cathartic about sharing your story to other survivors, so they know that their voice is powerful and that their activism will make a difference in the world.
Yes. Well, first, I would like to say, thank you all for even allowing me a space to hear these brave individuals, these survivors, to even say what they need to say. This is an extremely important topic, and that needs to be heard. And I'm just fortunate to even be able to sit here just to take all this in, so that I can take this back and fight for, equality, and fight for individuals to have the resources that they need. Everything that I have done thus far in politics and in my volunteering has been to ensure that young people don't have to go through the things that I've gone through growing up. I tell my story often about being homeless and going through a lot of things growing up, but also watching domestic violence in my own home, and watching my mother and father do that. So, you know, my whole thing is to be motivated to make sure that children are not seeing this and becoming normalized to it. And I think that's what a lot of young kids do. They become normalized to it. They think this is a normal relationship, to see their mother beating on their father, or their father beating on their mother, or them beating on each other. And then they in turn grow up, and then they do repeat the same behavior because they thought that was normal growing up. They thought that was what a healthy relationship was supposed to be. So I now have a 7-year-old daughter with my wife. And, you know, I try as much as possible to love on my wife in front of my daughter, so she sees what a healthy relationship is supposed to look like. So she knows what it's supposed to look like. So she knows how to recognize what a healthy relationship is. So, you know, that has motivated me to make sure that young people don't have to see this and don't become normalized to this behavior, because it's not a normal thing. So I will continue to fight, you know, from whatever platform that I'm given, to make sure that young people that we can start teaching this in the schools, for kids to be able to recognize it at home and see that this is not how things are supposed to be, and make sure that we can change things from the top.
Dr. Johnson, I want to thank you so much. I relate to that as well. I've never personally suffered domestic violence, but I'm a child of domestic violence. I don't remember my childhood except for those snapshot pictures of intense violence. And thank you for saying that, because it never affects one person, it affects whole lives. I am chiming in only because we had 15 minutes for this section. We have 10 more minutes, and I have another question, just one other question to ask, but I don't want to stop this conversation about my question of what brought you here today. If anyone else would like to please answer that first question.
Well, hi there. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone who's participating. This is so important. My name is Rebecca Kaplan. I'm the Oakland City Council member at large, and I also currently serve as Oakland City Council president. And before I ever ran for public office, I was an attorney doing housing rights cases, and working on tenants' rights issues, housing discrimination cases. And, you know, one of the tenants, actually more than one, that we talked to had been sexually harassed by the landlord and told, you know, I'll evict you if you don't do what I want. And so, you know, working at that time, doing housing rights law, I was encountering issues of sexual assault in that context, where what I was working on was, you know, people suffering around their housing. And I really, as a council member, one of the things I've worked on is to expand affordable housing and housing options. And I'm really hearing from so many people, including today, the importance of that opportunity, both the immediate place that someone who's being abused needs somewhere to go right away in that moment to get out of it, and supporting those efforts like we have in Alameda County and elsewhere that we really need to ramp up those efforts, but also that the broader problem of inadequate affordable housing, of the housing shortage, is a real contributor to the problem, and that people have trouble getting out of a situation for that reason. And so our movements around affordable housing and housing access, I feel, do need to be more connected with movements against domestic violence, and that the lack of access to housing and to affordable housing makes many situations worse and makes it harder for people who are being abused to get out of them. And so uplifting what we can do to fight for housing access, to fight for affordable housing, to fight for housing rights for victims of abuse, I think would really help, as well as continuing to fight to have more of those immediate places to go, those immediate 24/7 centers that, like I said, we have one, but the need is so great that we need more of those. And then just the last thing I would add is that I also have been involved in the movement against mass incarceration and for prisoner rights, and the number of women who are locked up for resisting violence or for being in the vicinity of some other offense because of the violence, right? Who get locked up for a drug deal that they weren't even the one doing because they were around and couldn't leave, is really significant. And so looking at that as an impediment to reporting, that the fear that the person who was abused ends up getting punished or prosecuted for things, as another impediment that warrants being pushed back against as we support those who've been abused. And thank you really for having me. It's really an honor to be a part of this conversation.
I'll just comment too. Thank you, Rebecca, for commenting about housing, rapid rehousing, housing first models. We've got to figure out how to provide survivors just plain housing, not just emergency shelter or transitional and then permanent, like they had to move 3 times in 18 months, but just housing. I started as a prosecutor 35 years ago in San Diego. It was kind of divine appointment. Nobody wanted to do domestic violence, and that's why I'm here, because I volunteered, and I did grow up in a home impacted by child abuse and domestic violence for generations. So, Jermaine, I appreciate you kind of sharing your story. I just want to highlight one thing. We got to figure out how to do a better job of not re-victimizing victims in the criminal justice system. But both of our survivors, courageous survivors that just shared, they were both strangled. You hear it, they're choked by their partner. Men who strangle women are the most dangerous men on planet Earth. By the way, police officers who strangle criminal suspects may also be the most dangerous men as well. So this going for the neck of a human being, it's different. We've got to come up with alternative solutions in the criminal justice system. But when you go after the neck of a human being, you can kill them in a matter of seconds. You can cause brain damage in a matter of seconds. So we've got to also differentiate between different kinds of violence and abuse in all this. And that low-level violence, survivors fighting back, trying to defend themselves, that's a totally different circumstance than a rage-filled man going after another human being. So Jermaine, just as an affirmation to you, thanks for your advocacy in South Carolina. South Carolina is one of only 2 states in America that does not have a strangulation assault statute that calls out going for the neck of a human being, South Carolina and Ohio. And it's one of 8 states that doesn't have a family justice center, wraparound services for survivors. So thanks for your advocacy in South Carolina. There's a lot that needs to happen in South Carolina, but blessings on you.
Absolutely.
So we have about 5 minutes left for this section. And this next question is a great segue. Thank you for all those comments. And it really goes with the answers we just had is, what has been a major roadblock for you in working to address domestic violence and supporting survivors? We've gone over a lack of streamlined services, incarceration, affordable housing. And because we only have about 5 more minutes for this question, maybe in a sentence or 2, I want to hear everyone so we can all take notes again of what has been the biggest roadblock for you in addressing this issue.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I was gonna say a roadblock that I feel like I had come across is, when you're a victim and if your case is ongoing, you're told not to talk about it. You're told to keep it under wraps. You're told to not, use their name or say anything. So it's like you being a victim, it's like, how do I share my story? How do I go and, ask for the help I need, even if I just don't want to talk to a therapist right now, or I can't afford one right now. And I can't really, I can't put it on Instagram. I can't tell other women. I can't, go and put it on any kind of platform or even just bring awareness to it because I'm not allowed to say anything about it. And then when you tell a victim, oh, you still can't talk about something or you're not allowed to talk about something, it kind of brings you back to the abuse that you're already going through when you're, oh, be quiet. Oh, talk when you're supposed to be talking, or, oh, don't speak too soon, that kind of thing. So it's like, I feel like even in a way of helping victims, you're still triggering that victimization, if that makes sense. If that makes sense to you.
Mr. Grayson, I think, did you want to say something as well?
I was just simply going to state, well, first of all, Dr. Jermaine Johnson had already addressed one, and that was as far as, and then also Rebecca Kaplan about housing, which was very important, but also education. But education not after the fact, but education before the fact. And that's what Dr. Johnson had talked about, getting into the school system and getting the message out in the school system while they're at that dating stage, that it's not okay for there to be abusive behavior. And that's where the cycle begins, and that's where the cycle starts. So trying to overcome that barrier and get into the school setting and educate teenagers in that dating environment to try to stop it from there. Temporary housing and funding. Funding is huge, and I struggle with that on the state level.
This is Monica Wilson, council member in the city of Antioch. I have to echo what Assemblymember Grayson is saying. Really, the biggest barrier is a lot of denial. So when I was first educating myself and then wanting to educate the public, I still had a portion of the public, some of our education partners as well, who would say, well, I'm not seeing it, therefore it's not happening, so therefore we shouldn't be talking about it. And it's like, having that conversation of just because you're not seeing it does not mean it's not there. And that was the biggest barrier as for me as a council person trying to educate my population. I mean, there were a lot of people that were like, come on in, please talk to us, educate us. But then you had, then again, on the other side, you had that group that's like, I don't see it, it's not happening. Or they have this, as I call the Hollywood mentality of what they think sexual violence or domestic violence or human trafficking is, that they think it's something that happens far, far away and not here, right here in the community. So I would say that's a major, I guess ignorance is a major barrier to entry of educating the population. That's what I see on the local level.
And to make sure we appreciate everyone's times, we do have to go to the next pre-recorded video, but remember we have this chat, and if any of the panelists wanted to add to that conversation of why you're here or the major roadblocks, please add that to the chat. But next we have Congressman Mike Thompson and Assemblymember Shirley Weber speaking in a video to continue this important discussion.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to join you today. I'm Congressman Mike Thompson. Though we can't be together in person, I'm grateful to the Yellow Heart Committee for convening this important town hall. Let me start by expressing my support for survivors of sexual and domestic violence. You're not alone. Know that you have an army of supporters. And know that there are resources out there to help you recover and to find support. You have support from your community, and you have support from the United States Congress. Throughout my time in Congress, I've been proud to vote to reauthorize the Violence Against Women's Act, landmark legislation to improve both the criminal justice and the community-based response to domestic violence. And it works. Since VAWA was passed more than 25 years ago, intimate partner violence against women has gone down by more than 50%. Last year, I was proud to vote to reauthorize the legislation and to expand it. That bill included a provision that's known as the boyfriend loophole. That loophole had previously allowed individuals convicted of domestic abuse to purchase firearms. A boyfriend could abuse his partner, be convicted, and still buy a gun, all because he wasn't the victim's spouse. Our reauthorization closed the loophole by prohibiting all convicted abusive partners from legally possessing a gun. Even though the Senate has stalled on passing the bill, know that I will continue fighting to get VAWA reauthorized. We can and we must do this, so no other person has to go through this, and so our community has the tools needed to support survivors. Thank you for being with us today for this important conversation. I know I will continue fighting in Congress for justice and assistance for survivors. Thank you very much.
I want to take this opportunity as the Assemblywoman from the 79th District, I'm Assemblymember Shirley Weber, to basically say that I am totally supportive of the Yellow Hearts Committee. The work that you do is profound. I know because for years I served on the Battered Women's Services Committee here in San Diego when we first started. And I got a firsthand look at what happens when people are abused and when women are battered and the impact it has on them and their families forever. And the fact that you are once again raising these issues, supporting the women and the families who are affected by this type of violence, this domestic violence, is tremendous. And the work continues. And we know that even in this pandemic, the situations are often made worse by the fact that people are captured together and therefore have very few options to do other things. So I simply want to let you know that I am totally supportive of it. My legislation often reflects that in terms of the services and support we have for those who are victims of domestic violence. I appreciate the work that you do. I know that out of this meeting that you're having will come some tremendous recommendations for all of us across the nation to make sure that we protect the women, we protect our families, and we develop the society that we think is wonderful. So once again, thank you so very much for the work that you do, and you can count me as a supporter.
Okay, so before going into our next survivor story, I wanted to preface and give everyone a trigger warning. Personally, I had to silence my computer when I listened to it last time. It is a much more graphic one. So just again, trigger warning for that, and do what you need to do.
I had been invited to a wedding at one of the most expensive hotels in my city. I was so excited. I had never been anywhere that nice before. I remember the dress I wore. It was dark blue with silver outlining. I remember thinking it was the most beautiful piece of clothing in the world and how I felt like royalty in it. I can't really remember the ceremony itself. I just remember being bored. And I can't really remember the reception. I just remember sitting at one of the tables by myself and an older boy coming up to me. I remember thinking he was cute. I remember him telling me about going to college and being completely fascinated with everything he said. He offered to get me a drink, a real one with alcohol, and 13-year-old me thought this was the most exciting thing that could happen to me. Throughout the evening, he kept sneaking me alcohol from the bar, and I guess I assumed he was drinking too. In hindsight, I realized he wasn't. At some point in the night, I couldn't stand upright and I could barely walk. I vaguely remember him holding me going up the elevator. I remember walking into his room and falling on the bed laughing. I was drunk and everything was funny to me. That's when it happened. I felt him touch my legs and grab at my underwear, but I didn't register it. I remember asking, "What are you doing?" and he didn't respond. A moment later, I felt him in my body. He was on top of me and I knew there was no getting out of it. And he said the words, "Just let it happen." And I did. I didn't fight back. The only thing running through my mind was that I was being raped and I couldn't stop it. When he was done, he got up and left and I laid there. It felt like years. The pain was excruciating, but I felt completely numb. At some point, I decided I had to get up and I did. I willed myself into the shower and let the water run over me. I just wanted to feel clean. I was in there for hours. I remember the water turning to ice, but I didn't care. I just wanted to feel clean. I remember the sun coming up and leaving the room. I had to put on the dress. It was the only clothing I had. There was blood on it, and it smelled like him. It no longer made me feel like royalty. I left the hotel and went home. I ripped the dress to shreds that night. I told myself that if the dress wasn't there, then I could tell myself it didn't happen, and that worked for a while. I spent years not telling anyone what happened. I didn't even let myself believe it. I kept convincing myself it was a dream, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I have now told some people the story except for one detail, his name, because he is the son of a senator, and I will always be the poor foster girl who was too stupid to realize what was happening.
Wow. Riveting story, a story of survival and bravery. And I just, being a survivor of sexual assault myself, I just want to applaud everyone today that shared their story and their bravery. Although there has been substantial efforts put towards supporting survivors, there are still many improvements that need to be made. So the question is, there has recently been a call of action from people around the world asking lawmakers to hashtag codify consent. How do you define consent? And when you do, and when do you think legislation will reflect your definition in order to protect survivors? Why are states hesitant to define consent? Would you like to start, Vanessa? Would you like to answer the question?
Sure. Yeah, so this is a very hot topic at this time. In California in particular, there was a bill that was just passed, SB 145, that actually articulated a 10-year range of potential consent starting at the age of 14 between a victim and their perpetrator. And this has been extremely troubling to me that this 10-year range has been introduced, and that this notion that anyone who is 14 can consent to sex with somebody who is over 18 years old. And it is particularly troubling to me as if the legislators didn't understand things like trauma bonding and the psychology of a child who is being subjected to an adult perpetrator. And it is disturbing. It has just really disturbed me that there was very little testing of that bill against the experience of a trafficking survivor or a domestic violence survivor that could be easily coerced to say that this is my boyfriend or my girlfriend and I consented to this sex. And so I think we need to have a better testing system for some of this legislation and some of these consent discussions. And absolutely we need some psychological and some physiological insight and science brought to the table that will help us determine whether someone under the age of 18 has the psychological wherewithal to consent to these types of activities. So it's very complicated. And I'd love to, we have limited time here, but this is a real passion of mine, and I think it's important to this topic.
Okay. Well, Monica, would you like to give your thoughts and how do you define consent?
Sure. So I'm going to look at it from, since I'm a policymaker on the local level, a lot of times we do look to the state on certain policy, although it is important on the local level to be able to now I just lost my train of thought, to be able to create policy and look at laws from the local level and how it impacts us, and how do we look at it in a way where we're either in alignment with our state policy legislators or we're not. I mean, for that, the codifying of consent, it would take a lot of conversation between myself and people like Assemblymember Grayson or Assemblymember Frazier, who is my representative in the Assembly, to make sure that we're all on the same page and that they understand it from the local level. And, it's definitely keeping those lines of communication open between us and the state, because as you know, on the local level, we see it one way and the state sees it another, and we definitely need to get in alignment, and they need to understand from our perspective.
Thank you, Monica. Carolyn, would you like to share some thoughts?
Oh, I'm sorry. I need a shirt that says unmute yourself. I mean, I think, I want to agree with Council Member Wilson, and she and I have had these conversations about how do we support, survivors, on a local and a state level. And I think, in my experience as an LGBTQ advocate, I think it's a little bit, I wouldn't say different, but it's a little bit more nuanced and complicated. A lot of times we have these conversations about people who grew up in a certain type of household, or they haven't had an example of what a healthy relationship looks like. But when you're talking about LGBTQ folks, especially our trans members of color, especially our Black trans women, a lot of them become sex workers, and a lot of them are entering domestic violence relationships out of a form of survival. And I think that it's unfortunate. I'll be honest, I had some people who hit me up about this particular event and said that they don't think a lot of the organizations that are involved are supportive of Black trans women. And really, when we talk about violence, when we talk about people who are being targeted, when we're talking about people who are being murdered, we have to specifically talk about Black trans women. Black trans women, when you talk about recidivism and when you talk about coming out of the criminal justice system, a lot of them come out of prison and they don't have anything else that they can do but be sex workers. So we have to make sure that our organizations are supportive, are opening to them. We have to make sure that we are supporting organizations like TGIJP, Transgender Justice Initiative in San Francisco, like the Transgender Cultural District in San Francisco, because those are really, when you look at a lot of the numbers, those are the people who are specifically being targeted to go into this lifestyle. In my other life, I am a Lyft and Uber driver, and I do that a lot of time in the off hours. So when I'm out driving at 5 o'clock in the morning, I'm driving around and I'm seeing the trans women who are on the corners in the financial district, the trans women who are on the corners in the mission district. Those are the people who are greatly impacted by sexual violence, and we need to make sure that we are including them when we're creating the frame of how we're creating policy around this.
Thank you. One of the things is mentioned as one of the questions is why are states hesitant to define consent? So I'm going to kind of look over to Dr. Johnson. He's in another state outside of California. Do you find this too to be an issue in your state?
Well, absolutely. And if anybody knows anything about South Carolina, I mean, just as in like a few years ago, you were still it was still legal for you to beat your wife on the steps of the courthouse at high noon. I mean, we're still in the good old boy system in South Carolina. Everything is red, and they pretty much control everything. So if they want to really change something, they really could. We're still one of 3 states that doesn't even have a hate crime legislation. So I mean, the situation. So you have things like what happened with Dylan Roof at the Mother Emanuel massacre. We couldn't even charge him with a hate crime on a state level because we don't have one. It's situations like that continue on here. And I'm gonna, I can get into the statistics of domestic violence with South Carolina, but we've been in the top 10 for the past 20 years. I mean, it's been bad. So, when you have a situation like that, you have a lot of these politicians here that, they don't want to define consent because either them or their sons or somebody that they know will fit into a box where they are themselves were, perpetrators. So it's like, well, let's just kind of avoid it. Let's ignore it. Let's pretend it never happened. Let's just, let's just kind of, brush it off to the side. So that's something that has got to be addressed here in South Carolina. And, we have some people who are running for office here in South Carolina that I believe are going to shine light on some of these issues. I have to thank Mr. Gwynn there because, that was one of the things I had no idea that we were one of 2 states without the strangulation. I had no idea, and I can guarantee you that I will be pushing forward with that when I get in here. But these are some things that have got to change.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Because it is important that we do consent, could have just this rally call around consent. And I'm hopeful that legislators will do a campaign to codify consent with their fellow legislators that they interact with to bring, I've lost my chain of thought, but to bring it to the forefront, that's something we need to talk about and address. Segueing to another question, although California outlawed major states like New York just outlawed it or still haven't, well, what are the necessary steps needed to be done to close the consent loophole that allow police rape in custody for all states? So let me kind of rephrase that. So how can we close the consent loopholes that allow police rape when you're in custody? Can I start with Rebecca?
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you asked. Oh, somebody else have their sound on? We're getting an echo. Okay, can you hear me all right now? All right. No, I'm really glad you asked that. And actually, that's what I was saying I wanted to bring up when you were talking about consent, which is we have had some really horrific problems and horrific cases in Oakland of police sexual abuse, including of minors, including a case that got a lot of press attention where over 30 law enforcement officers sexually abused a minor girl who essentially they passed around. And so I think it is absolutely essential, as you mentioned in asking the question, that we should have laws throughout that a person in custody can never be consensual. And what's outrageous about this situation is she was a minor, and in some cases was also in a situation, you know, where they were in a power over situation relative to custody and policing. And the officers just claimed, oh, it was consensual. And so here we have a case where it was doubly not consensual. And this is just the one young woman who was willing to talk about it to the press. This is, you know, we hear incidents of this happening many times to many young women, where in some cases the police officers were trading information for sex, where they said, you know, we'll tell you when the next bust is going to be in this area, or we're making threats of, you know, I'll arrest you if you don't. And the notion that it should ever be consensual, not to mention this is a police officer on duty, right? So they shouldn't be allowed to be having sex regardless, even if it was consensual, because you're on duty. But then the notion that somebody who you are in that position of authority over, that could be consent, should just be never considered an option. And just taking it back to the first question at the start of this, having a police department that is known for committing sexual abuse is another one of those barriers. You know, what would make a victim not feel safe coming forward to the police? Well, having police who have a reputation of abusing victims, you know, perpetuates that problem, makes it harder for victims of abuse to come forward as well. So it's both the particular case, but it also creates a broader problem as well.
Assemblymember Grayson, would you like to address this about the consent loophole?
Yes, thank you very much. And both Carol and Monica provided a perfect segue into a response from a state representative. So thank you to both of them. Vanessa had started this whole conversation answering your question initially with some very thoughtful remarks and comments. So thank you for those comments. And as someone as chair of a select committee on interpersonal violence, one of the questions that you had asked was what is it, and why are states struggling, and why is there a struggle for definition? And I would venture to say, from my perspective, knowing my colleagues, that there is a vast and distinct disconnect between the policymaker and the victim and advocacy groups that are out there. And so as a chair of a select committee of an interpersonal violence committee, I would be thrilled to be able to host an informational hearing that allows voices to come in to where the policymakers are convened, and to be able to provide testimony, and to provide science and education, and to provide the recommendations that can close these loopholes to empower us to do what you need. And that's my commitment. I know we're in COVID times, a lot of restrictions, but would love to have conversation with many of you on how we move forward and facilitate that kind of informational hearing. Thank you.
Assemblymember Grayson, awesome. And thank you for that commitment to be willing to host information hearing. You guys all heard that. Well, I want to thank you all so much for answering the questions. That concludes this panel time.
Hi, I'm Congressman Eric Swalwell, and I want to thank the Yellow Heart Committee for all you're doing to support domestic violence and sexual assault victims. Special shout out to your founder, Dia. You guys are working harder than ever when we need you the most during this pandemic, while cases of abuse are on the rise as victims are stuck indoors. There's more Congress can do too. I was proud in the Judiciary Committee and on the floor of the House of Representatives to support the Violence Against Women Act reauthorization, but the Senate is holding it up. Many Republican senators are beholden to the National Rifle Association's objection over new restrictions on spousal and boyfriend and girlfriend or ex-boyfriend and girlfriend abusers. We can't let that stand. So I'm going to continue to do all I can to support what you do, not only because it's important to me and my constituents, but as a former prosecutor, I saw what victims are subjected to, and I saw what good policies can do to keep them better protected. Keep it up, Yellow Heart Committee. We need you. People you'll never meet are counting on you, and I promise to continue to be a loud advocate in Congress for your work. Thank you so much.
So wanted to give another trigger warning. We have another story that could be potentially very graphic. So again, if you need to turn your sound off or anything like that, please feel free to, but just another trigger warning.
When I was 18, I met an older man, around 26, I believe, through my job. He was a manager and I worked at a car dealership. I was not at all attracted to him, but agreed to go to lunch with him a couple of times. There was no chemistry, nor did he try anything other than just talk. He asked me to go to a movie one night, and against my better judgment, I agreed. Once we got to the theater parking lot, he changed. He wanted me to smuggle beer in my purse. He was acting like an ass. When it was over, I wanted to go home, and he told me that he wanted me to meet his grandparents that he lived with. We went to this house, but entered through a side entrance. His room was in the garage. I never saw his grandparents or anyone else. He forced himself on me, and I kept pushing him away. I remember telling him no repeatedly, and he was holding me down while removing my jeans. I remember that night was rainy, and I wore jeans and a very baggy sweatshirt and tennis shoes. Nothing revealing at all. I remember thinking that this could not be happening to me. I don't even remember getting dressed after, but I do remember telling him to take me home. I cried most of the way, and he told me he would call me later. I told him to stay away from me. I felt so alone when I got home. I was so afraid to tell my mom because she would kill him and end up in jail. To this day, I do not remember his last name. I had a hard time with healing over the years because I kept replaying that night, wondering what I could have done that may have provoked him. I also beat myself up because I was one of those women who didn't understand why rape victims didn't report it. I felt like I would have been torn apart and it would have been my word against his.
Hi, I'm California State Assembly Member Rob Bonta, proudly representing the great cities of Oakland, Alameda, and San Leandro. Unfortunately, I can't join you all as you come together to address the serious issues of sexual assault and domestic violence. But I am honored to support survivors and share a few words about the role I believe public policy has to play in supporting and uplifting survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence. I want to start by thanking all the survivors who are sharing their stories today. Your courage and resilience inspires me to continue to champion and support policies that help you and other survivors. In 2015, Governor Brown signed my bill, AB 1140, that allows more victims of violent crime to fully participate in the California Victim Compensation Program. Before my bill was signed into law, victims of domestic violence were barred from compensation if they failed to cooperate with law enforcement at the crime scene. However, we know that things like fear of retaliation from their abuser may make survivors afraid or hesitant to cooperate with law enforcement. AB 1140 deleted this barrier to compensation. I'm proud to have authored legislation that takes into account the complicated dynamics of domestic violence and the need to treat domestic violence victims with proper care. Last year, I authored AB 628, which would have extended employment protections to family members of survivors for taking time off from work to provide those survivors with assistance when they are seeking relief services, counseling, and other supports. Unfortunately, this bill did not have the votes needed to pass, which goes to show how much work we still need to do in this space. The things that are most worth doing are often the most difficult, and I'll continue to be a passionate ally and advocate for survivors. Thank you again for hosting today's important discussion, and I look forward to working together to support survivors of assault and domestic violence.
Wow. Well, I'm Assemblymember Rebecca Bauer-Cahan. I want to start by thanking the survivors who shared their stories here today, Aaliyah and Dia and all the others, for being brave and sharing your stories. I think as Assemblymember Grayson and the other policymakers here have said, it makes us better to listen and to bear witness to your stories and to be able to represent you on our city councils and in our state houses. So thank you for doing that and being here today. We've talked a lot about policy already during this webinar, about the role of housing, of education, of laws around criminal justice, and their role in this conversation. But I think we should talk more about that. You heard a little bit from my colleague, Assemblymember Bonta, about how difficult it can be to pass some of these laws, even if they seem just and right. And so I want to talk a little bit about the criminal justice system and the place of victims in that system. We know that perpetrators of sexual and domestic violence have not been prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law to date. And, Casey, you can probably speak to this as a former prosecutor. But let's talk a little bit about what policies might move the ball forward in getting justice for those victims in the criminal justice system. So if anybody has thoughts they want to share on what we can do better to get justice for the victims, please share. Casey, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So, yeah, I spent 20 years as a prosecutor, wrapped up my career as the elected prosecutor in San Diego. And I feel very passionately that the best work that prosecutors do is always when they're co-located with advocates, police officers, doctors, nurses, therapists. You have higher clearance rates in these cases. We have higher success in going after offenders when we wrap victims and all their services under one roof. That's why I'm so aggressive in advocating for wraparound services model. I support shelters, I support rape crisis centers, child advocacy centers. The family justice centers have great research in California that we produce more accountability for offenders. I also think that in the criminal justice reform world, we do need to give survivors more options. So yes, you need to call 911, you're in crisis, absolutely. But that can't be the only option. We've got to figure out how we deal with the most dangerous of offenders in the criminal justice system. But if there are ways to use restorative justice, transformative justice, whose son is doing some transformative restorative justice work in Contra Costa County in the Family Justice Center, I think we have to lean into that. So we have to have this ability to distinguish, is this guy really scary, dangerous, and he's the kind of guy that we need to lock up, or are we in a situation where a survivor fought back and the criminal justice system isn't the best place to deal with this because we're going to lock up the survivor. We're going to end up arresting her. Poorly trained cops arrest survivors all the time because they don't know what they're doing. So I'm a big fan of, we just did this big survey of survivors on what they wanted in the criminal justice system. You know what their number one answer was? They want advocates rolling with every police officer on every DV call in California. Because cops do different work when advocates are by their side. And we can't just expect cops to be out there by themselves. And that was the number one answer our survivors in our national survey wanted was send advocates with the police officers to every scene and every call, and there'll be better outcomes for survivors.
I started by saying we should be listening to survivors, and we should. That is an incredible suggestion and something that we should be working towards. Assemblymember Grayson, did you want to chime in?
Yes, thank you. And it's always an honor to follow someone like Casey. So I have like a wish list here. So I'm going to go through it really fast so that others can speak. But number one, as Casey had already mentioned, having a police special victims unit or the equivalent present at a setting or an environment like a family justice center. Number two, having the DA's office present at the family justice center or the equivalent. Number three, being able to have a coordinated community response other than just police showing up at DV calls or sexual assault. Number 4, the ability to testify in court remotely if the perpetrator is present. Number 5, being able to facilitate multidisciplinary teams. And number 6, the big wish to end the big wish list is California Commission on Interpersonal Violence that would be composed of advocates, survivors, and members of the legislature. And this commission would be a state-supported and centrally located so that efforts across the state can be centralized, and the legislature would then have a trusted team of experts providing policy solutions. That would be my wish list.
That was a lot. I like it. Anybody else? Monica, please.
Yes, I'm so happy that we're having this particular discussion, because it's happening right here in my own city, and I'm kind of getting vilified for it right now. But really looking at, I like to look at more policy around looking at programs similar to, I'm not very sure if anybody's familiar with a program called Cahoots out of Eugene, Oregon. And that is a group that works a group of advocates that work alongside our police departments, because right now we're vilifying people, we're vilifying our victims, and we're vilifying people with mental illness. They're not committing a crime, but we need the advocacy and the services right there with our police department, because right now our police department is getting stretched between that. They're also being expected to be social service people when that's not what they're supposed to be doing. We really need an advocacy group as a part of our police departments to go to these situations, because a lot of times, sometimes victims are like, I had a bad experience with a police officer, so therefore I'm not too comfortable, or they're just going to shut down, or they're just not going to report at all. So I know that we definitely need to send those particular types of representatives and organizations to these calls alongside our police department. So again, happy that we're having this. Like I said, I'm getting beat up right now here in Antioch about wanting to see this happen in our city.
If I could chime in and just say that also, I think we need to change our metrics. What do we consider success? When an officer goes to a domestic violence call and someone is arrested, is that success? Or is there success 3 months and 6 months and 12 months down the line when you see a batterer has completed their 12-month program and has new perspective on the behaviors that they've maybe adopted because they saw domestic violence in their home, as Dr. Johnson highlighted, which we know there's a direct correlation between family violence and the children's behavior and then how they grow up. And so do we take the time to be clinical and analytical, kind of long-term, looking at the life of the woman, or the man who's been abused, and have we equipped them to re-engage in the world? We provided them counseling? Have we addressed the housing issue that Councilmember Kaplan talked about? All of those elements are part of this very complicated scenario, and it shouldn't be deduced to whether an arrest was made or not. That's just the tip of the iceberg. We need to really dig deeper if we're going to get at the root cause of this issue.
I love that. One of the organizations that I get to work with, Tri-Valley Haven, part of their work is actually serving the people in our prison who are themselves victims of violence and treating their underlying hurt and trauma from the violence so that the cycle stops. And I think it's such an important part of their work that they do. They also have a shelter for women and children, but I love that piece of the work, because your point, if we stop the cycle, I think that is the true metric of success. Casey, you were going to add something in.
So I just have to say something about this. So we also have to go upstream from this. So virtually everybody that is engaged in family violence, doing harm to another human being, grew up in a home impacted by child abuse and domestic violence and some mix of drugs and alcohol. And if you put an overlay of racism or historic oppression or poverty on top of it, it's a force multiplier. So for me, my passion, and I think our passion in California, should be children impacted by trauma. Real criminal justice reform isn't getting people out of jail or prison. It's keeping people out of jail or prison to begin with. It's keeping people out of the criminal justice system and the juvenile justice system to begin with. So, we invest in this camping and mentoring program for children impacted by trauma. They have high ACE scores. Nadine Burke-Harris is talking about the importance of measuring ACE scores in California. That's great, but that's not the end of the equation. If you have a high ACE score, so what? You've got to have increasing hope in this child's life. They've got to have goals and pathways. They've got to have the ability to go a different direction. You can't just say, hey, you're screwed. You have a high ACE score. Man, that's a bummer. You have to be able to say, there's another pathway for you in life. So for us, in our longitudinal study of Camp Hope, California, we have a 100% college enrollment rate in our program, 4 years. We don't have any kids going to juvenile hall or prison or jail. They're going to college and vocational schools, and they're finding their pathway forward. So I think the resources should be taken from the prison system of California and put into children exposed to trauma. If you want to change the world, that's where we prevent the next generation of perpetrators of violence and abuse, sexual assault, domestic violence. It's not just fighting about who should be in prison and who should get out of prison, or who should be arrested and who shouldn't be arrested.
Can I just jump in here? Because I think that there's a couple of things that we are really, and I want to continue to stress this. We continue to, I'm not going to say that we're pushing a myth about people who've grown up in domestic violence, but I'm saying that we are ignoring huge populations of people who are going into sexual abuse, who are going into sex work out of survival. And I'm going to continue to keep saying this because I don't want us to keep pushing this respectability myth that we need to put all of our resources into we need to put it into our children, into our schools, absolutely. But they're not all being impacted by growing up seeing bad relationships. Some of them are, the bad relationship is the parents that are treating them badly. Some of them are children who grow up in normal households, but who are treated badly and who are sent out into the streets and end up as sex workers, or who are seeking out relationships, who are seeking out support that they're not getting from these homes that we as people see as normal. And that is a very, very important point. In these schools, and I work in the schools, I'm running it for a school district here in Contra Costa County. In these schools, we are not having these important conversations with our youth. I had a student when I was working in LA County. He didn't come from a bad home necessarily. I mean, it was a low income home. That's not bad. He came from a home where they did support him per se, but at the same time, he was a gender non-conforming student. In the second year that I had him, I didn't have him for the first 2 years because someone told me he just went out to Vegas and went out looking for somebody that was going to support him. And he started doing sex work in Vegas because it was better than being in his home. So we need to make sure that we are putting these policies forward, that we are being very nuanced in how we are putting them forward to support our kids. And also, I'm a person who lives in California. We're focusing a lot on California, but I'm also from Louisiana. I have friends and family members in Louisiana. We have to remember that we have policies on the books in Louisiana and Texas when we talk about age of consent, policies that were put on the books to support racists who were sleeping with young girls and who are now impacting Black and brown men, putting them in the criminal justice system. I know a man right now who can't live in his own home because his parents are housing a young person and the system says that he can't live in that home. What he did was not wrong, but the system that is still in place from the 1950s and the 1960s is keeping him oppressed. There's so many nuanced things that we are not doing when we're having these conversations about sex work. And I think in California, not even just about sex work, there's so many conversations that we don't have nuanced conversations about because in California, we are in such a bubble. We don't have the context to have them. We don't have people like my friends in Louisiana and Texas who are impacted like this, but we need to meet them because they're in states where there's no one that's going to support them. So we have to have that conversation when we're having it. We can't just limit this to who we're creating policy around. We have to make sure we're thinking about all the children, put everybody. Kimberly Crenshaw's where it says when you're creating policy for Black and brown people, you have to make sure that everybody is in the frame because if everybody is not in the frame, you're never going to affect the least of us, the most marginalized of us. It's not going to happen.
Thank you for that. And I think, we passed a bill last year that I was so happy to support that said that we couldn't prosecute sex workers if they come forward as victims of sexual assault for the sex work, because we want victims to come forward, and it was an extra level of support. And I have to say, when I was sitting on public safety and my Republican colleague, who's the most far right member of our committee, voted for it, and I talked to him afterwards and he said it makes us safer. And so I do think these are important conversations to have to make sure we're moving policy in the right direction. I was, this year I was proud to co-author a bill that says that if a victim comes forward and they were part of the story is they were involved in illegal drug use or underage drinking, we can't use that against them to prosecute them for that other thing, because we have to support victims in coming forward. And I think it is important, to your point, that sex workers are a part of that everybody be in the frame and we think about all of the victims as they come forward. And those are policies I know we move forward, but we have so much more work to do, and we need you to be our partners in helping us identify that work. I'm going to ask the last question, then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Johnson. So given this incredible conversation we've had today and closing up our last panel, I want to know what your short-term and long-term goals are to support survivors. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Johnson first.
Definitely, Carolyn and Casey, thank y'all both for adding in that information. We need all of those solutions to fix some of these problems that we have out here. We need people like you all to continue advocating and fighting and making sure that we have the diversity in this conversation to make sure we're looking at all angles of this big problem that we have. So, my short-term goal is to get us out of the top 10 in domestic violence. I mean, we were number one in America 3 years straight for domestic violence. In 2018, we were number 6. I think this year we are number 7 or 5 or something like that, but we're always in the top 10 of domestic violence situations. And with that being said, we have got to have a task force. I need some lobbyists. I need people to be up here talking to their senators, to their congressmen, to their representatives to say, hey, we have got to get something passed. We have got to do something. We've got to take care of the situation, because when we've got a situation where we're top 10 for 20 years straight of women being killed by men in this state, that is absolutely just irresponsible. And we cannot continue to say that we are the Bible Belt and that we believe in people and we all lives matter and all these different things that people want to keep throwing out there. But yet we're watching this stuff happen every single day here in South Carolina. We have got to do something about this. So, my short-term goal is, like I said, is to make sure that we are doing all that we can so that we are not up there. We can't afford to lose one life, and let alone being top 10 when all the lives we're losing here. So I'm committed to working with, every last one of you all here to make sure that I am addressing what needs to be addressed to what we need to get done. And I'm going to be talking to Casey definitely offline to work on some of these policies that I can implement here.
Thank you. And so we only have time for one more person. And I actually would like to ask Aaliyah, if you could share with us what your long-term and short-term goals for all of us are and for yourself.
I had to find the unmute button, but I definitely feel like one of my short-term goals so far has just been, because I have a 1-year-old daughter. So one of my short-term goals is to make sure that she knows and feels and just reciprocates like love, and just knows what love and happiness and respect looks like in a relationship and a friendship and any type of things in school and any kind of settings. Like, it's to the point where I've been scared of doing daycare, because it's like, okay, you're too young, you can't even tell me if something happens at daycare or anything like that. And it's like the fact that I have to think about that makes me want to become more of an advocate long term, so I can do what you guys are doing now and bring together committees and give people a safe space to come to and just feel like they can open up and talk about their trauma, their whatever they're feeling mentally, physically. Sometimes I feel like I won't even call you a victim, for survivors, if you want to, you have certain days to where you just don't feel like doing anything. You don't feel like talking to people. You don't feel like explaining it 24/7. Even in those moments, I want you to, think like, oh, I'm feeling bad today. Let me go call Aaliyah, or let me go, go to her, her advocate center and see if I can just do something today, as far as like drawing or just talking to somebody or just coming here and, sharing how I'm feeling with other survivors. I feel like that would be my long-term goal I just want to give people a feeling of safety and sanctuary. That's my long-term goal, if anything.
I love that. Thank you. And I have a survivor that's close to me who always says to me, I'm not a survivor, I'm a thriver. And I love that. You are clearly a thriver. So thank you for sharing with us. And I know I speak on behalf of everybody here when I thank the Yellow Heart Committee for putting this incredible, incredible conversation together. I know we've all learned an incredible amount, been touched by the conversations today. And I hope spurred to action, because we have a lot of work to do, as we've heard here today. And I want to thank all our co-hosts, Love Never Fails, Girls Like Us, Family Justice Center, The Facts, and others for being a part of this. So I'm going to turn it over to India to close us out.
Okay, we have one more pre-recorded video, so go ahead, Jessica. All right, well, I hope everyone enjoyed that amazing town hall and all of the knowledge and information that we heard. I know it's a lot to digest, so please be on the lookout for our after-event email that will provide a lot of information and also resources for anybody who may need help or felt triggered. But going forward, I'm super glad to finally announce that we are proposing a bill in 2021 called the Sexual Domestic Violence Task Force. So some of these demands come from all of the years of hearing the woes of what survivors have to go through and how we can support them. And some of these demands are actually personal to me, as I've been a victim of not just an assault physically, but also one on the internet, as listed in the fourth one. So all of these demands are going to be going forward in 2021. We are looking for a California State Assembly member or state senator who is willing to take this on and make this their initiative. We are there to back them up, and we are there for all the research that they need. But we really need the audience to be there to support us when it's time, when we need the statements of support, when we need the donations, when we need all the help to make this law. So please, please follow us along on our journey as we introduce our bill and we really get into this policymaking business. Okay, so thank you everybody for staying the entire time. I felt it was very important to bring up our bill that we're introducing, considering we do have a couple of legislators on this panel, hint, hint. But going forward, really thank you to all our co-hosts. Thank you to all our panelists. Thank you to the moderators. This was incredibly done and beyond what I could have even imagined. So I just want to also take a moment to thank all the members of the Yellow Heart Committee. Some of them are the attendees, so you may not be able to see them, but some of them are present right now. We have Chacha, Nija, Michaela, and Jessica. So you can air clap for them. They are a huge part of this. And thank you to the other ones you cannot see who are in the attendees part, but they really did that. I couldn't have done this alone, and they were there for me 100% of the way. So wanted to go forward. Aaliyah, do you have any final remarks that you would like to say?
My last and final remarks are definitely thank everybody so much for just extending an amazing job today. When she invited me to be a part of this, I wasn't even honestly scared. I was just like, if India's doing it, I'm gonna do it, because I know I know what she's about and I know how determined she is to make something happen. So and she did it. She made it happen. All of you made it happen, and I'm just thankful to be a part of it. And if anybody would like to email me, message me, anybody in the attendee group, you can definitely feel free to do so. I'll leave my email in there for you guys. Thank you guys so much. All the legislators, but thank you guys again.
So thank you, everyone. We will also be talking a little bit more. Nigel has a little closing words to add too, but do not hesitate to follow us on social media, Yellow Heart Committee _ at the end for Instagram. Also on Facebook, we will be sending out a newsletter again with all resources to help people after for anyone who may have been triggered. But go ahead and close this out, Nigel.
Yes, I just want to say, I think everyone did amazing, and there was a lot of things that we talked about, and I just want everyone to know that we do plan to hold another town hall in December. The date is to be determined, but we want to give some more time to address not only our the demands that we're putting out, but also some other concerns that audience members and the panelists have brought up. So please be on the lookout for that for more information, and we hope to talk to you all again soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.